Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a new Ask the Pet Food Pro chat. This series is brought to you by Pet Food Forum 2022 and the editors of Pet Food Industry, the magazine and digital content provider with decades of providing the market with pet food expertise. You can find our content at petfoodindustry.com. Ask the Pet Food Pro is a great opportunity to connect with an industry expert and ask the questions that are most on your mind while learning information to help you and your company provide high quality pet food and pet treats. Today's chat is all about colorants in pet food and treats, and it's supported by Oterra. Thanks very much to them. Our expert today is Ashlee Martin, Senior Applications Scientist Pet Food for Oterra. Welcome, Ashlee, and thank you for joining us today. She probably will need to unmute to start talking.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Sure. Before we dive into the Q&A, which we're going to get to very quickly, I do have a few housekeeping notes. First, you've all been muted to ensure everyone can hear and focus on the discussion. So please submit.
Could you try again?
So please submit your questions or comments in the chat box. Some of you submitted questions beforehand, which we really appreciate, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can, along with the ones submitted today. And finally, this chat is being recorded. You can access the recording starting in about a week at petfoodforumevents.com, and then click on the Ask the Pro tab at the top. So with that, we're going to get into the discussion. Ashlee, we had a question about the...
And it keeps running, and I just don't know why.
Can everyone please mute? We had a question about the Colorants Market and how, what is the status? Is it growing? What are some things on the horizon? What's happening with that?
Right. So the colors, I would say natural colors in general are growing. We've been seeing this trend in human food, and now it's definitely coming to pet food. That's the trend to add colors that are not synthetic. Colors themselves have been used in pet food historically for a very long time, including synthetic. So I think that market has been well established within colors, and now consumers are asking for things more natural. So we do see the natural color market growing.
Okay. Folks, I'm going to hit mute all on all because we're getting some background, and then Ashlee, I'm going to ask you to unmute again. Okay, let's try that again.
There we go.
Okay. So what are some things coming down the pipe? What are some challenges, issues that people might need to be aware of? Supply chain disruptions comes to mind.
Yes. So, I mean, I think that's everyone's forefront now is supply chain disruption. So mainly those are actually ingredients that are not the colorants. So the colorants we actually have established, there's established contracts, there's established growing fields. So typically the colorants are not the block, but then the ingredients used in those colorants. So things such as like a maltodextrin or a sugar even, for example, is causing disruptions in the color industry as well. Okay,
so yeah, nothing's immune from it, right?
Right. And everyone always wants colors, and it's a small part of a formula, but it's a very, very important part of the formula because it's what consumers see. And we know that with pet food, the consumers are actually the pets, but it's the pet parents who are buying the food, and they want to see something that is appealing to them.
Sure. And we had a few questions about that, in fact. So what other consumer trends besides natural are you seeing? I mean, is there a role that the industry should play or might want to play in terms of educating consumers about colorants?
Right. So I think there is a lot of questions, and consumers don't know a lot about colors. I think many pet parents don't even realize that if they're buying a food that's colored, green, orange, and red, that's not actually natural products, that's actually colored. So I would say that in general, consumers may not even realize there's synthetic colors in their food or in the pet food, and then even more not realize that there could be a natural option. or in some instances, removing the color altogether if that's what fits more. So with natural colors, you actually have the opportunity to kind of educate consumers with your labeling. On the back of label, you would be required to either say colors added or colored with, and then the source. So let's say you're coloring it with vegetable juice. You could say colored with vegetable juice instead of colored with FD&C, Blue 2, and Red 40.
Right. Which
so I think
consumers would not know what that is.
Right. So I think that adding natural colors actually gives manufacturers a way to educate consumers, and let them know that these are naturally sourced colorants being added.
Okay. We've had a question just come in. From a consumer perspective, is there a color that pet parents like best or dislike? What are some of the trends that you're aware of?
Ooh, so I think the colors that they like best are colorants that mimic the natural food. So we're not talking about, creating pet food that looks like M&Ms. We don't want that vibrant blue, vibrant orange. I don't think a lot of pet parents actually would want that for their pets, but they want to see something that's fresh, that looks interesting. So oftentimes you're adding back color that you would lose during processing.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. So just the more natural shades, the meat colored shades, the vegetable colored shades, things like that.
That makes sense. Although, have you seen regional differences? It's been several years, but I was at a pet food factory in Thailand. Probably like 5 years ago, I'll say. And in that market, and these were more economy products, if that makes a difference, in that market, that company was actually making almost like technical. I mean, they were using pretty bright colors, and they said that's what our consumers want. Have you seen regional differences like that?
I do think so. So in the Asian markets, their human food is more brightly colored. So
right.
I would expect that the pet food they'd also be used to seeing would be more brightly colored. And then in the EU, you have almost the opposite, where if they're adding color, they want it to look like there's almost no color being added. So yes, we do see regional differences.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. You touched on this with the labeling, how manufacturers can use that to educate consumers about the natural colorants. There's some questions about regulations, and I know you're not necessarily a regulatory expert, but I'm assuming you would know. I mean, are there some major things to watch out for in various markets in terms of the regulations and labeling?
Right. Well, the regulations and labeling are different in every market.
Sure.
For colors. So that is the first thing, that you may be able to find a color that works in every region, but your labeling would be different. And in the US specifically, where I have more expertise, those colors are actually regulated by the FDA, and
right.
then it's copy and paste into the OP. So they actually are the exact same regulations for humans and for pets. And in those regulations, it will specify the colors. So if it's approved for general use, then it's also approved for pet food. If there's a regulation listed where it has a specific use, then it would not, if pet food wasn't listed, then it's not allowed in pet food.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about, and I guess this may be a US question, can you make additional claims of some colors, such as antioxidant sources or things like that, related more to health or function?
Right. So with natural colors, you have to kind of be very careful what additional claims you're going to make, because the sole purpose of that ingredient is for colorant. So if you're adding something like beta carotene, for example, which could be a vitamin A, and then also a color, you should be labeling it as a colorant. If it's changing the color of your product, then it should be labeled as a colorant, but it does have a dual function. And then as far as colors providing additional antioxidants, typically they're added at such low levels that it wouldn't actually provide much nutritional impact. Like let's say from a vegetable juice or an orange carrot, if you were adding, it wouldn't actually provide much nutritional value.
And that's probably true, I mean, in terms of any kind of functional aspect,
Yes.
right?
Yes. So it's just beta carotene that comes to mind that has kind of that dual function with colorant and also vitamin A supplement.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, a question came in, and this is kind of a nice segue into some of those more natural sources like beta carotene. And what about spirulina, for example? Is something like that allowed in pet food? And is that a good color choice?
Right. So
color source.
Right. So spirulina is actually not allowed as a colorant in pet food. It is not one of the approved uses by the FDA. So you should not be adding it to your product as a color. Now it's also a supplement. So in that instance, it can be added. I believe it's listed in the OP as an ingredient. So whether manufacturers want to add it as an ingredient and maybe color is a second hand effect. But if the primary function is for color, then spirulina probably shouldn't be used if you're looking for that blue colorant.
Okay. Someone just commented that alfalfa nutrient concentrate is the best natural green coloring agent.
Right. And that actually is another interesting. So alfalfa actually also is not approved as a colorant. So it is an ingredient that brings green, but it's not a color additive. So that's where we're kind of in pet food. There are some ingredients that can add color and nutrition. And if the nutrition is the forefront, then it's fine to add. But alfalfa should not be used as a colorant because it is technically not approved as a color additive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it sounds like so there was a comment, by the way, that spirulina is allowed in the EU.
Yes.
And
I was referring to US. So yes, it is allowed in the EU as a colorant, and it is allowed as a nutrient in the US, but not as a colorant.
So it sounds like there's lots of these natural sources that can be kind of tricky. Yes. In terms of colorants. What about something like that maybe is a little more mainstream, maybe not, fruit or vegetable juice?
Right. So those are specifically listed as color additives. So it's listed as fruit juice. So that can include grapes, elderberries. I mean, any source of fruit that also provides a color would be under fruit juice. And then vegetable juice is any vegetables like sweet potatoes or black carrots, purple carrot, violet carrot. They're all kind of the same thing. Yeah, so that I think I got a little sidetracked. What was the original?
I was just commenting that there seems to be, and we just had another comment that there seem to be a lot of natural colorant sources that can be included maybe because they're approved as ingredients, but maybe not as colorant specifically. Right. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. So the fruit and vegetable juices could be included as ingredients, but they're also approved as colorants. So those sources would be labeled as colorants. Okay.
What about something like turmeric, which we all know in human food? I use turmeric, so I know it definitely changes the color and adds some flavor. I mean, is that? Are you? I think there was a specific question about turmeric, but then it's like, to me, speaks to a broader question of, because of humanization of pets, are we seeing some of that desire to see more, human spices, for, if you will, in pet food?
Yes. So turmeric is a prime example of that. And that is actually a color that the ingredient could be used for nutritional purposes. If you're buying a turmeric colorant, it will have an extraction process that removes most of the flavor, removes most of those extra components. So you'd be adding it in for the color purposes. But then other turmeric sources actually contain more of the flavonoids and more of the health chemicals in those products. So then if you're looking for more of those health claims, there are turmerics available for that as well. So we see it both from a colorant and a nutrient standpoint.
Okay. Okay. So basically people need to know the OP. In the US at least, they need to be
Yeah.
very much with the
Yeah.
AFCO official publication
Yep.
to know in terms of what is allowed for labeling and what is not.
Right. Yep. Yep. And I would say that if you have, you know, a lot of companies, either people have come from food companies or, you know, food manufacturers manufacture pet food. So if you have an understanding of the human regulations, they are really very similar to the pet food regulations as far as
In terms of colors. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. That would help. So let's talk about some other examples of natural sources versus synthetic. You know, so, and, you know, I mean, this may be getting a little bit too in the weeds, but people have questions about things like lycopene, beet, radish, cabbage.
Yep. All approved sources
Okay.
for use in pet food. Yes.
Okay.
So
as colors or ingredients?
As colors. As colors.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
Interesting.
So lycopene, I actually was just looking at the lycopene. So lycopene is listed in the OP, so therefore it is allowed for pet food.
Okay. Yeah, so someone just put a question about that. So yeah, so folks, if you are not familiar with the AFCO official publication, go to afco.org. And there is a version that's available to the public. And then I think you can still buy one that has, I'm not sure of the exact difference between the public version and the one that's for sale, but it definitely is a must if you're going to be formulating and selling pet food in the US. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about synthetic versus natural. I mean, are synthetics pretty much passé in terms of colors, or are they still used? Does it depend on the market?
I think it depends on the market, and I think it depends on the, you know, the target market for that brand. So, you know, I think even though we're a natural color company, and, you know, I think that they're in the US at least, I don't think consumers are willing to kind of let go of that, we'll say budget brand maybe. So it may not be cost effective to change synthetics in a budget brand, and consumers might not even be wanting it. So I think that's a big difference between US and EU, is that EU really had this drive and consumers were saying, no more synthetics, we need something else. But in the US, it's kind of divided. So there's a whole group of people who want the more natural products, but then I think there's a whole group of people who still want their, you know, their standard product that they've been feeding their pets for, you know, 20 years. So it's very much dependent on the market and very much dependent on the consumers.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, not everybody can afford premium or super premium pet food.
Right.
So,
and you know, natural colors, it's not a secret that natural colors are more expensive than synthetic colors. But I would say that there is huge technology advances where we're closing the gap between those price differences. So it is not, to add natural colors to your product is a much more, it's easier to do now than it was, you know, 10 years ago, I would say.
Well, that's good.
So there's more available.
That's very good news. We were just talking about the AFCO OP. Is there a list, and maybe other people on that are tuned in know this, a union list of permitted colorants in the EU? So I'm assuming it's a similar.
Yeah, there is. I'm not so familiar with those regulations. I have a counterpart in Europe, but I can definitely reach out, or whoever asked the question can reach out to me, and we can get you that list of colorants.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure it's probably available in a similar way that the AFCO.
Yes,
OP
and
is.
it is kind of available that way. It requires a little bit more digging, but
okay.
But yes, we can provide that.
Good to know. Well, you know, before we went live, you and I were talking a little about some of the issues happening, and we've gotten several questions about this. It seems that one of the big things on the horizon, or actually happening, that people are dealing with in the EU, is titanium oxide. So what is the issue with that? You know, if you can give people some background if they're not familiar with it, and then where do you see that going?
Right. So kind of the big news in the color world these days is the ban of titanium dioxide in Europe. So does that, I think we've had a lot of questions, it's banned in Europe now. There's a limited time to remove those products from the market. What's available as a replacement? Is that ban going to come to the US? There's all sorts of questions like that. And there are some replacements available, but it's important when you're looking at titanium dioxide replacing that there probably is not one size fits all. So if you're using a starch per se, in a canned application, it may not work in an extruded application or vice versa, because titanium dioxide is really, and it's not inert, but it's a ground mineral. So it provides whitening across all applications, whereas what you would use as a replacement would not.
Okay, well, backing up a little bit. So pet food companies have traditionally used titanium dioxide to, when you say whiten, is that to come up with an actual white product to make things lighter?
Make things lighter. So I think historically it's been used to make things lighter. Meat has a very dark appearance in extruding. So again, that was kind of a drive by consumers, that consumers feel that they shouldn't have these dark, looking products that maybe look bad, or in the canned application. Also, where meat may brown or gray over time, titanium dioxide is added to kind of brighten the appearance. So it's in pet food, I would say it's never used as a white per se.
Right.
But it is used as an opacifier. So then when you're using anything that you might look at as a replacement, it's really looking to see if you can provide that opacity.
Okay.
And then many times you may be able to add a natural color to kind of change that appearance as you take out titanium.
Okay. And then I've read a little bit about the titanium dioxide issue in the EU. Is it because it was perceived as possibly being dangerous to pets?
Yeah, so it actually started with human food. And so it was banned in human food. And in that instance, it was banned because of, or not, it's due to the nanoparticles. So it was an aspiration. It was breathing in, sorry. The titanium dioxide, that was more of an issue. So manufacturing of titanium dioxide more than the consumption of it. But then there was more studies done that basically told them that they cannot exclude that titanium dioxide does not have an effect when it's ingested. So therefore they were banning it. So they can't exclude that it doesn't harm people. So that was the grand conclusion. So therefore it will be removed from the market.
Okay. Understood. And do you have a crystal ball? Do you have any idea whether that could happen here in the US or other markets?
I think that it is causing people to question and maybe remove the product on their own. I personally don't think that the FDA will ban it. California has been working on banning of synthetic colors. And that's been a project for a while. And I don't know, I don't think the FDA will make such a strict, law that it would ban either titanium or synthetic colors. But again, that's just my opinion. I do think that we should move to natural, but just based on the market and what's happening, I just don't see that in the US.
Okay. Well, for folks in Europe, or say they are here in the US and just want to be proactive just in case, what are some alternatives?
Right. So in Europe, calcium carbonate is approved. Other starches can be used. So there's some rice starches in the market, some other forms of starches. But in the US, it's important to point out that these colors are also not approved as colorants.
Okay.
So calcium carbonate is approved as a colorant, but it's
No,
very
just a moment.
Can everyone please mute except Ashlee? Sorry about that.
No. So calcium carbonate is really the only one that's approved as a colorant, and that's approved in confectionery.
Okay.
So so again, if you're adding a product as an opacifier, you're maybe not, you don't want it white, so you're not necessarily coloring it. You're adding an ingredient that also opacifies, but it's just something to point out that, you know, it's good to run it by your regulatory just to ensure that, you know, everybody's aligned and when using these products.
And as you mentioned at the beginning of the discussion about this topic, that you have to make sure it works
Right.
with the type of format and the type of processing you're using.
Yeah. So one example that I think people have figured out in trying to replace titanium is the calcium carbonate. So when using a calcium carbonate in a canned food, you tend to have a reaction causing bloating cans and potentially exploding. So that reaction is causing CO2, which isn't harming the product, but it causes bloating cans. So so it's something to be aware of, that maybe is a good option for kibble, but for canned food, you know, we're still looking for probably the holy grail for white.
Okay. Okay. So speaking of safety, we had a question come in, and I think this is something that everyone might want to know about. I mean, you know, are there any current studies happening around toxicology of artificial natural colors? I mean, are there, so you have the titanium dioxide happening. Are there other ones that could be suspect or that might be, you know, because they haven't been well studied before, for example?
Right.
Or this, you know, situation with the titanium dioxide where it happened first with humans. Anything else that's on the horizon that you can think of?
So there's nothing that there's really nothing, but I would say that, you know, pet food trends and ingredients are closely following human.
Sure.
So, you know, and this is a little off topic, but plant-based, for example. So, you know, at least I thought plant-based would not come to pet food because I was like, no way, this isn't happening, but it is. So, so that's like a prime example that if it's happening in humans, I think we need to closely monitor that. And because of the humanization of pets, I would say that it would happen in pets.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So besides keeping on top of regulations around pet food ingredients, watch the human food ingredients.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I'd say it's a good indicator. And, you know, even with the ban of titanium in Europe, it happened humans first. And I'm actually unclear on all of the studies that they did over there, but I'm not sure they necessarily found out that it was harmful for pets. It was just, it could be harmful for humans, so therefore it can be harmful for pets.
Okay. I mean, is there a lot of research on some of the more quote unquote traditional pet food colors that you're aware of, or?
No. So I'd say that, you know, synthetic colors and even natural colors have been highly studied in humans, but I think that, you know, it's just history of use in pets, and I'm not aware of any, you know, besides your typical toxicology studies, that there's any like long-term use studies that have happened for pets.
But toxicology studies do happen.
Yes.
Take place. Okay.
Yes.
That is good. That is good. Yeah. I mean, it's probably like just about any other kind of research in pet food is there's just not a lot of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. That is true.
I just need to.
We've had some questions come in beforehand and also during this chat about different processing parameters. So let me see. What do people need to know? So, most pet food processes are very heat intensive, whether it's extrusion, whether it's retort for canning. So more traditional formats are very heat intensive. What are there certain things that people need to keep in mind in terms of using colorants in that vein?
Right. So there are sources of colors that are more heat stable than other sources of colors. So for example, beet. So beet, it's a gray color. It's widely used in both human food and pet food, but it is known to not be heat stable. So if you're looking for a red and you have an extruded product or a canned product, and even a baked treat, if you have a really high temperature, just that your beet, your reds won't survive. Some natural colors are susceptible to oxidation. So paprika, for example, is highly susceptible to oxidation. So if you don't have an antioxidant in your product, you run the risk of it fading over time. I mean, there's a lot of things that I can talk about. So like turmeric and annatto can be light stable or light unstable. Sorry, not stable to light. So there are formulations we can use to increase that stability. But if you're putting a product in a completely transparent package, so packaging is something to be aware of.
That makes sense.
Both from oxidation and also light. And then pH. So some colors are also pH sensitive. So they precipitate at low pHs or fade at higher pHs. So I think a little bit of color education is always great when starting with natural colors.
So there's a lot to think about.
There is a lot to think about, but I think that people, they may have this opinion that it's difficult and I don't want to use it, but natural colors, they can work when you have the right matrix and when you have the right color.
Okay. What about this? This is the question I was trying to find that had come in a little while ago about processing. What about methods of extraction in terms of vegetables, fruits, things like that? Does that play a role in? Can everyone please mute again? Does a method of extraction in terms of actually getting the colors from some of these natural sources play a role in how the formulation works, how the processing goes?
That's a good question. So I would say the extraction is probably not as critical as then the formulation of the color. So the source of the color and then the formulation of the color, but the extraction is really kind of that middle process where we're just getting the color out, getting the pigment out, and then it's concentrated or formulated. And that's really the important part in the color and whether it's stable in your final application. And then the extraction methods are all, again, very clearly outlined by the FDA. So if you're ever questioning an extraction, that it's all defined in both the CFR and the OP.
Okay. What about, so we actually, this kind of may goes back to, this may be a repeat of the titanium dioxide conversation, and I just didn't notice it because someone had asked about how do you reduce or dilute like a dark color intensity in kibble. Is something like a titanium dioxide or a pacifier the answer, or are there other methods?
I mean, I would say the simple answer.
Okay.
But you can also do interesting things by adding colors. So let's say you have a kibble that's a very dark shade. Well, then maybe if you want some differences, or if you want some variability, you may be able to add color to the darker, like a yellow. You could add a yellow that would then kind of dilute that dark brown shade, and then potentially add another color to increase the shade of one product. So I think that sometimes using natural colors requires a little creativity. Okay. So especially if you're in a new product development and you have the opportunity to, kind of start from the beginning, I encourage you to reach out, either to us or your current color supplier, and just see if they can, help to kind of create that look that you're looking for. If you don't have the ability to add titanium, but that would honestly be the best.
Okay. What about systems for monitoring color in products? Are there specific, best practices or specific types of technology?
Yes. So we have lots of, they're called colorimeters. So we have lots of them on site. So we use both spectrophotometers and colorimeters to measure our color intensities. For your final product, there's a lot of colorimeters that are built right in line. There's colorimeters that are portable that you can actually, take a picture of. Let's say you have a treat and you're curious if the color is uniform. You can actually hold it up to the treat and then you can get that color reading. And then that color reading is translated into an LAB reading. So that's your kind of your color wheel. And then you can test if you have variability or if your product is consistent. So there's a lot of different manufacturers. And I'd also be happy to point somebody in the right direction if they were looking to add that to their manufacturing.
Okay. Anything else in the processing, monitoring aspect of using colors that we haven't touched on yet that you think is important for people to know?
I did mention pH just a little bit. And with pH in pet food, you actually have the ability to kind of work with that pH to create some more interesting colors. So black carrot, for example, is traditionally used in low pHs to provide a red, like in a beverage or a candy or something in the human space. But in pet food, we can actually use that product because of its pH differences to create a purple or to create a brown. So again, it's important to pay attention to your pH and actually know what the pH of your product is.
Okay. So there's a lively conversation going on in the chat box about different sources of.
But I'm trying not to.
No, that's okay. Different people are advising each other on different sources of color, so it's great. So someone just mentioned, a natural color alternative for caramel, for example, caramel, however you pronounce it. Yep. Someone mentioned malt extract.
Yes. So malt is approved in Europe to be used as a colorant, but actually in the US, it's an approved flavor and an approved ingredient, but it is not approved as a colorant. So that actually is another one of those kind of middle ground where you would really need to double check with regulatory that it would be a direction that you would go if you're in the US. It's also approved in other regions throughout the world. It's just primarily not approved in the US as a colorant.
Okay. What about this? Yeah, gotcha. Okay. This is kind of an outlier. So we've all know that, CBD and hemp and all those kinds of things are all over the place for both humans and pets, whether they're legal or not. Someone has asked if anyone's ever tried to use hemp as a colorant. And hemp is actually, is different from CBD in that it actually is an animal feed ingredient and may, eventually be approved as a pet food ingredient, as a nutrient. So does something like that hold promise for color?
Potentially. So, we kind of get into a product like that would probably provide a very low coloring level. So, again, then you'd be adding it primarily, I would think, for a nutrient, and maybe it would provide some browning, but no, I don't believe that I know that we haven't studied any of that, but I don't believe anyone is necessarily looking at hemp as a colorant.
I just thought it was an interesting question.
It is, and it's a great sustainable product, and it would be great. But I think that colorants, you want to add them at a low level, right? They are an additive, so when you start getting up into the 2-3% of your formula, that's kind of crazy to be adding for a color.
Right. So we've been talking about this all throughout the call today, and we've revisited it several times, but it sounds like your formulator is your best friend when you're using colorants, because it's, we all know, or most people know, that to formulate a pet food is a very delicate balance of the nutrients you need, the ingredients you want to have in there for certain claims, what you can, legally use and claim, what's best, obviously what's best for the pet. I mean, so I'm assuming that it's not, like you said, to get creative, there's probably a lot of trial and error when it comes to some of these, gray area ingredients that can be functional or nutrients and also colorants as to how much to add, right?
Yes. So and generally that brings up another point, when adding colorants, because the pet food formula is such a, let's say, well-oiled machine, there's not a lot of room for colors.
Right.
So if you're putting in colors, you have to be taking something else out, and then that's in there for another purpose and for a nutrient. So we typically want to recommend that colors, we produce our colors to provide lower dosages so that you have a little bit more room in your formula to add those colorants, and you don't have to take anything or as much out. That's important.
Okay. What is a typical inclusion rate for a color?
It really depends on the color source, but I'd say, less than 0.5% is very attainable. And then our stronger pigments like carmine or turmeric or even annatto, for example, could be used in the levels of, 0.1 or below.
Okay. So
percent by volume or by weight.
Okay, so pretty tiny amounts. So
Yeah.
Just a little segue here. We've had a few questions about the recording. The folks, that will be available at petfoodforumevents.com, and there's an Ask the Pro tab at the top. If you click on that, you will find the recording in about a week. So give us a week, please, to get it all processed and up there. What is the typical inclusion rate for something like calcium carbonate?
Right. So going back to calcium carbonate, that's where you kind of need to be a little creative, because that is a much higher rate than titanium dioxide. So then you're in the 1 to 2% range for calcium carbonate. And then you have to be aware of how it might actually change your formula. So it could potentially make your product a little more brittle. It could affect expansion. So that's where, if you may not be able to add as much as you would like to get that whitening effect. But I do also see that, those, I don't want to say brightly colored, I think the more natural products are coming to the forefront. So maybe when if you're looking to replace titanium dioxide or a synthetic color, maybe it doesn't need to be a 1-to-1. Maybe you can add just enough of what you need to provide that variation, but you can't necessarily get a 1-to-1 match because of how much you would need to add.
Gotcha. And
So
I'm sorry.
Oh no, it requires a little creativity sometimes when working with those colors.
Okay. And someone commented that for cats, you also have to consider the calcium dosage.
Yes. Yes. So that's, again, calcium carbonate has been the one that's most in the forefront, I would say, as a titanium dioxide replacer. But then you do have to worry, because these are minerals, and these minerals carry nutrients. So with calcium carbonate or calcium sulfate or any of the potassiums, you have to keep that in mind. Okay.
Does the particle size or pellet size of pet food affect the color and how it's dispersed? I mean, what are some considerations in terms of that kind of product format?
Right. So I guess it depends on how you're adding it to your product. So of course, if you're dry blending it in, a pellet would not get dissolved. It would not express through the extruder. But if you were forming a liquid from these colors, then the pellets would be a great option. It would provide less dusting. Some colors, for example, FD&C lakes, color through dispersion. So they're a very fine powder. So if you're using a lake in your product currently and you're looking to replace it with a natural color, then we would look for something with a fine particle size to disperse better in your product. That makes sense. So yes, I would say that it really depends on what you're looking for in manufacturing.
Okay.
What is the best source to choose, or best form of your color to choose?
Okay. What's a lake?
Oh, a lake. So an FD&C lake is a synthetic color that is formed through a reaction with aluminum. So it is one of the synthetic colors, but it uses dispersion to color rather than dissolving. So a dye would be dissolved in your product, and a lake would be plated. Plating is a term we use commonly in food. So it would color by dispersing rather than dissolving.
Okay. Okay. I'm going through to see what other questions we have. Like I said, we had a lot of questions about specific colors. I think we've addressed them all, but yeah, just to repeat for folks who may have come in a little bit later, if you have specific questions about whether a color is approved, either as a color or as an ingredient that could then be also used as a color, just not claimed as a color, be sure to consult in the USC APCO official publication, and in the EU, FEDF and has sources that list what approved colors are, what approved ingredients are, and all that. So, is there anything else that we haven't talked about today, Ashlee, that you think is important for people to know in terms of colors?
Just that, I've been in the color industry for a very long time, starting primarily with food and then moving into pet food. And, if request samples, it really comes, it's kind of, I like to say colorants are kind of art. I mean, you're seeing it with your eyes. It might not be a one size fits all. So, request a library, play with the colors in your application, if you're technical, and then I'd say don't let it be such a roadblock.
Okay.
Okay.
Here's a good question to end on, I think. Do you have a favorite color for pet food, and why? I'm not sure they're asking this as you as an expert or as a pet owner, assuming you're a pet owner.
Right. I am a pet owner to lots of pets. So, so my favorite color is annatto. It's produced in South America. It's been used historically for thousands of years. It's been used as paint. It's been used in cheese. I think that annatto has a lot of uses, and you can get a shade from yellow to orange, and then we are Oterra, so we love orange. So yeah, I think annatto is it's a great stable color, and it has a great place in pet food.
Great. Good to know. Yeah. Good to know. Well, thank you, Ashlee, very much for the discussion today, and for sharing your expertise. Thanks again to Oterra for their support. To continue your learning on this or other topics related to pet food, we will be doing these Ask the Pet Food Pro chats throughout the year. We also have a number of webinars if you go to petfoodindustry.com/webinars. And we have a couple conferences coming up in May. We have Pet Food Forum in Kansas City in just a few weeks, about a month. And then a few weeks after that, we have Pet Food Forum Europe in Germany in conjunction with the InterZoo. And finally, I said this a few minutes ago, but for anyone else who didn't hear it, just go to petfoodforumevents.com and click on the Ask the Pro tab in about a week, and you can get the recording of this. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and evening. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.